Hey everyone, it's LS, and this video is going to be a mini guide on jungle Tahm Kench. So some people are probably wondering, why jungle Tahm Kench? Well, Tahm Kench inside of the jungle actually has amazing 1v1 dueling potential inside of the jungle itself, and then on top of that, he is one of the strongest 2v2 duelists in the game. Factor in his late game scaling and the changes to Cinderhulk and his passive a few patches ago, Tahm Kench is actually really strong right now. So we're going to do a rundown of everything, but first we're going to start with his runes. What you're going to want is you want 9 attack speed marks, 9 scaling HP seals, and then you want 9 scaling CDR glyphs. So when you're looking at these runes, what you're probably wondering is why attack speed? Well, that's primarily because of his passive, and you want to make sure that you can apply as many stacks on the opponent as possible. When you're looking at the yellows, you just basically need to know that Tahm Kench can actually sustain in the jungle without any sort of armor, mostly because of thick skin. Because of this, you want to try to be as greedy as possible with your runes, and as long as you make it through the first clear, you're going to be okay. The MS quintessences are in here because Tahm Kench's movement speed actually isn't that bad, and when you combine it with Wanderer, Chilling Smite, and Mobility Boots, it makes for really, really strong ganks. On top of that, and lastly, the scaling CDR is necessary because Tahm Kench's items don't generally enable him to get to the 40% CDR cap, so you want to try to just get as much CDR as possible. Magic resistance, which is commonly found inside of the glyph tree, is not really as important to Tahm Kench because he only builds tank items primarily due to his passive. It is important to note that there is an alternative rune setup. The alternative rune setup only changes the glyphs. You're going to take 6 scaling CDR and 3 scaling MR. This is just a little change that you can do if you do want to round out your build with a little bit more MR early on if you're facing an extremely heavy AP team. Alright, now moving on to his masteries. For Tahm Kench, I take the setup 0, 12, 18. What you're going to be noticing inside of the Cunning tree is that I take 5 points in Wanderer, 1 point in Runic Affinity, 5 points in Merciless, and 1 in Dangerous Game. I do this primarily because I want to have synergy with the movement quintessences that I'm taking, and I want to really just enhance my mobility boots when I end up purchasing them. The Runic Affinity is sort of nice on Tahm Kench because he is able to make use of the buff's durations when he does have them because of how he ganks and how he sustains inside of the jungle. Merciless is just sort of nice because generally when Tahm Kench does devour a target, they're already within the 40%, 30% HP range, so he is going to get that enhanced damage from Merciless. Finally, rounding it out, Dangerous Game. 5% of your missing health and mana on a kill or an assist is pretty gigantic on Tahm Kench, considering late game he can have HP from anywhere from 4,000 to 5,000. Looking at the Resolve tree, you'll notice that we take 5 points in Recovery, 1 point in Explorer, 5 points in Runic Armor, 1 point in Insight, 5 points in Swiftness, and rounding it out, Strength of the Ages. We take this tree because we want Explorer for the enhanced movement speed, again, running through brushes and moving in River. This again will have synergy with Wanderer, Mobility Boots, and the MS quintessences that we're taking so that our Tahm Kench is super fast. Add this in when you get Deadman's plate later, you're going to be moving really quick. You're going to want to take Runic Armor because of the bonus to all shields and healing is super big on Tahm Kench. Insight is mostly just important because you want to have your flash up as often as possible, and it's sort of nice to have on Smite. I can see arguments for Perseverance, but honestly it's not really needed if you really learn how to sustain inside of the jungle as Kench on his first clear. Swiftness is an obvious choice because you want that tenacity and slow resistance. Finally, Strength of the Ages is just the most likely thing that you need to pick. It gives you HP, which ultimately converts into his passive, thus giving him damage. Now we're going to go into itemization. You're going to start with Hunter's Talisman, which you immediately want to make into a Stalker's Blade as early as possible. This is primarily because Tahm Kench benefits a lot from having that Chilling Smite so that it's able to help him in getting on top of the enemy. While you have Stalker's Blade, generally you want to get boots. Tahm Kench, again, he benefits so much from being able to just get on top of an opponent and stick to them so that he can constantly apply his passive. After you have your Stalker's Blade and boots, you immediately want to complete Cinderhulk as fast as possible. Now, Tahm Kench's itemization gets a little bit weird from here, because he should always be itemizing relative to the game flow and relative to the opponent's team comp. If the opponent doesn't have too much AP damage, then you want to get Deadman's Plate. Additionally, Deadman's Plate is really good if the game is a closed game. And what I mean by a closed game is if the laning phase is likely to extend beyond 15 minutes. Deadman's Plate is going to have a lot of synergy with mobility boots, and it's going to make you just a monster running across the map. If they have a lot of AP, then you can prioritize Solari's Locket as your first item immediately after Cinderhulk. The shield that it grants you and the base HP is just insane. Also remember that mobility boots are Tahm Kench's best friend. Mobility boots plus Wanderer plus the movement speed inside of Brush and River plus the movement quintessences means that Tahm moves really fast. Add in Chilling Smite and it makes it really easy to gank lanes even if your laners don't have any sort of CC. It's also important to note that if you are snowballing really hard, pre 8 minutes or something, you might want to prioritize getting mobility boots before even beginning to build into Balmy Cinder or Cinderhulk in itself. Tahm Kench, while the HP from Cinderhulk really does help him in an age with his clears, his ganks are really strong if he gets the ball rolling, and because of his E thick skin, it makes him able to tower dive a lot earlier than most other junglers in the current meta can. Now, if you don't end up getting mobility boots before Cinderhulk, what you can do is you can just delay upgrading the tier 1 boots, and you can ultimately just make them into Ninja Tabi or Mercury Treads later on, as that's going to benefit you a lot more than mobility boots as the game goes on. Tahm's itemization, again, is super situational. Core items that basically are always going to look to buy, but aren't always going to buy in the same order every game, because Tahm doesn't have a cookie cutter build, is Spirit Visage, Locket of the Solari, Thornmail, Guardian Angel, Deadman's Plate, and Ronduin's Omen. These items are almost always likely to at least have some value on Tahm Kench as a first or second core item immediately after Cinderhulk. If you're facing a super heavy AP team, then you might want to consider going Spirit Visage with Locket of the Solari, and then only getting Thornmail for an armor statistic against their one source of physical damage. This is going to make you really durable against the enemy team, give you tons of HP, and still give you the sticking power to fight the physical damage source. Okay, so when it comes to skill order, you're going to always want to open with W. Following that, you get Q at level 2 and E at rank 3. After this, you're going to put 2 points into Q, and then obviously get R at level 6, and then after level 6, you're going to max W and then max Q. This is because at this point in the game, the W duration is a lot more superior than the slight slow scaling on your Q. And also at this point, it's likely that you have Chilling Smite and tier 2 boots, so you don't really need the benefit of the scaling on the Q. Remember, if the game draws on really late, or if you're just not really getting a snowball going and you're really starved for farm, don't go into Deadman's Plate. If towers are falling really early on and the lane phase has already ended at 9 minutes, 10 minutes, or 11 minutes, Deadman's Plate is not going to be the best item because your ultimate is already going to be able to move you around the map to wherever you need to be when it's an open game. Also, always remember on recalls, Ruby Crystal is your best friend. It builds into almost every single item that Tahm Kench needs. Likewise, Giant's Belt is his best friend. So whenever you're thinking about recalling, if you have the option between a Null Magic Mantle or a Ruby Crystal because you want to build into a Spectre's Cowl, choose the Ruby Crystal because it ultimately gives you more HP, which means potentially more shield, and it means more damage on your auto attacks because of your passive. In regards to his itemization, I've made a little image for some of you guys that you can use as basically a cheat sheet against certain team comps. What you're looking at right now is that cheat sheet, and just follow it as it is, and it's going to be successful a very high percentage of the time. Okay, now moving on to Tahm Kench's jungling. His first clear is really difficult, and I can't stress enough that after level 3, you really need to kite and make sure that you're using his cooldowns efficiently. Otherwise, you'll end up taking way too much damage and you'll find it difficult to sustain inside of the jungle. You'll also be really susceptible to getting counter jungled early on unless you're the one doing the counter jungling. What you want to do is, if you're blue side, you always want to start Gromp. Tahm can kill Gromp from 540 HP just using the W and an auto attack, so you can think about that if you want to conserve Smite and immediately go for a level 2 invade on the enemy's red. If you're on red side, you can still start Gromp, but in that case, you're going to need to smite it, even though I think that that's a weaker clear. If you do end up starting Krugs on red side, you want to smite the Krugs and then immediately do Wraiths and move on over to your blue side jungle, as red is going to hurt you a lot without having your thick skin available to you. Remember, Tahm's Tongue gives him 175 range, so when you are clearing red and blue, it's really easy to not take a lot of damage as long as you're kiting well. I see so many people mess this up and they end up almost dying to either one of those two camps. You don't need to take any damage to them, especially if you have Stalker's Blade when starting one. After Tahm's first recall, and when he has Stalker's Blade, generally his next objective is to get to Boots tier 1 so that he's able to be really relevant inside of ganks due to his enhanced movement speed. Anyways, when you're doing this, your best friends for camps are going to be Gromp and Wraiths because they're the easiest for Tahm to clear. Additionally, Scuttle Crabs that have not leveled up too much are also extremely easy for Tahm to clear using his W. Beyond that, you want to avoid fighting against Wolves and Golems because they're the most difficult things for Tahm to clear, and they generally don't synergize very well with his gank routes. When you're jungling as Tahm, if you're not playing him hyper aggressively early on and you choose to take the route which ensures that he gets to a safe level 4, you have to keep in mind that Tahm Kench is a countergank king. He is one of the best junglers in the game at being able to stay near a camp or complete a camp and then appear for a countergank. Inside of a 2v2, because of his passive and how much CC he can offer, assuming that you get the stun off or devour on an enemy champion, or devouring your ally to skew the enemy's combos, Tahm can just disrupt so much, and you need to view him as a counter gank king until you have the items that enable him to become the aggressor, or until you're level 6. One thing you want to keep in mind when you're jungling as Tahm is he is super strong in 1v1s. A lot of junglers sometimes have to be afraid of other junglers, but because of Tahm's passive and his ability to stun people from level 1, he doesn't need to be as afraid of getting counter jungled at level 4 or 5 or even level 2. Generally, Tahm's weakest and most susceptible point is when he's trying to transition into level 3 and then into level 4. Remember that when you're playing him, you can take an ally with you when you're ulting. So when you finally do hit level 6, don't be afraid to ping your mid laner or your top laner and go for ults behind the opponent to really catch them off guard. Combine this with mobility boots and the chilling smite and it almost makes for almost perfect ganks all the time. Again, don't forget how tanky you are. You can ulti on top of turrets even if you're bringing an ally with you. Most typically this is going to be seen in bot lane where you can instantly just bring the mid laner or top laner with you to surprise the enemy bot lane for a 4-man party in bot. Or you can take the support with you while it seems like the AD carry is in a 1v2 scenario and then you and your support appear behind the enemy bot lane duo. When you're doing skirmishes and team fights, make sure that you try to maximize auto-attacking as much as possible before having to stun or devour the enemy. This way, you can maximize your damage while having as many stacks up on the enemy as possible. This is primarily due to the change that Tahm received a few patches ago, where his passive now amplifies his damage over time up to 3 stacks. On top of this, inside of the mid-game teamfights, you want to view Tahm as basically a giant utility bot that has a ton of HP but also does come with a lot of damage. Inside of mid-game teamfights, apply your passive to as many people as possible and try to get as many stuns off to help your teammates. Eat an ally if you must, but don't cast Devour on an enemy champion unless it's generally going to execute. Again, that's not always going to be the case, but generally it's pretty good. You don't want to cast a mid-fight Devour and then have your movement speed completely gimped and be unable to really auto-attack anyone else and thus lose a lot of CC for your team. Anyways, finishing this up, while Tahm will take some practice to get used to, you need to understand that while he doesn't have the same level of mobility or the same burst damage or sort of threats that some of the other junglers have, he makes up for it in the ability to just completely skew teamfights and skew duels. And again, because of how tanky he is, because of how strong Cinderhulk is on him as his first core item, and because his recipe items benefit him so much more than other junglers in the game, Tahm Kench's wake up in the game is super powerful, and then he almost never slows down. So even if Tahm Kench seems slightly behind, his item efficiency and his gold efficiency is vastly superior to a lot of other champions in the game, and that makes him almost always relevant at any point in the game. Anyway, remember to always know your limits on Tahm Kench. Late game and also mid game, depending on the situation, you can use him as a mini Twisted Fate to also split push if necessary. Don't be afraid to do very heavy dives against the enemy team, trusting in your thick skin. Also, something that I want to mention is when you're in the pick and ban phase and you're wondering when is a good time to pick Tahm, generally, it almost is always an okay time to pick Tahm. Tahm is a versus all jungler, which means that he doesn't really have any bad matchups or instances where he's going to be a bad pick, at least not in solo queue. Alright everyone, and that is a basic Tahm Kench guide, and I hope that you all enjoyed it.